Hey everyone, it's Paul here from Seven Sigma, and I'm here with a guest today, someone who I've been doing a bit of work with in the Power Apps and Flow space, and we're going to show you a use case that we think is pretty useful in a lot of scenarios. But before we do that, I'll just hand over to Daniela and she'll introduce herself and maybe how we sort of started collaborating together, and then we'll talk about the use case.
Yes, thanks. So I'm Daniela. I'm originally from Germany. Back in Germany, I used to work for Microsoft.
I didn't know you worked for Microsoft.
Yeah, I did, back in Germany. And the funny thing is, at the time, I attended, they had an open door day, and the user experience department was essentially showcasing the apps, the customized apps they build for companies. And at the time I thought, oh my God, that's the future. Wouldn't every company want an app to make their workflows more efficient? But at the time, it would have been extremely expensive to hire Microsoft to build you an app. And so now, years later, it seems, and I recently spoke to my former manager and he said that's exactly the problem, that it was just too expensive. So now they've sort of shifted in strategy to say, okay, if that doesn't work, we'll give people the tools to build the apps themselves rather than to hire us to build it for them. And so, yeah, it's pretty exciting, but yeah.
Oh, that's very cool. I did not know that. So sorry, totally interrupted you before you were introducing yourself, because I was like, we might put that in actually. That was good.
I then came here to Australia to complete my master's and have worked in corporate global organization in looking after the corporate learning management system for a couple of years. And recently over half a year ago now actually, I've moved into the IT department to work with Power Apps and Power BI dashboards. And so I'm now building apps for the company, and I'm sharing information with Paul and new ideas product, and there's always new ways to explore solutions. So.
And I think Power Apps is kind of, they talk about it as a citizen developer tool, and I think you're the poster child of the citizen developer, because you're not a programmer by profession, right?
Yeah. So I really enjoy that they do try and build the applications so that anyone can learn them, and I'm the best example because I never worked in the IT department of anything, and so now I'm able to build apps, so that's really cool.
Well, what we'll do then, I'm going to put our little picture off to the side and put a desktop up, so we exit stage left. Woo, there we go. And let's talk about this use case that we developed. Now, I actually can't remember whether this was something through training, when we were doing stuff, or it was driven by something you asked me to do or another client. But it's actually a really effective use case, and I know it's been of benefit to you. So shall we sort of tell the story there?
Yes, so we have a bunch of PDFs that we want to make available as through an app to the employees, and the out-of-the-box PDF reader app that was provided is kind of working by putting the documents in an individual's OneDrive, which, as a company, you wouldn't want anything in an individual's account if you're planning on sharing that with a large number of employees. And that's why I then contacted you to say, is there a way to build an app that connects to PDFs that are sitting in a document library of a SharePoint site, so it's not tied to an individual?
Well, I'm pleased to say that there is. So let's actually go through how we actually did it. So I guess what we need to do first is I've got a SharePoint site up here, and it's a pretty stock SharePoint site. It's got a document library here. I have actually added a couple of columns to this document library. So there's a couple down here, icon URL, selected icon URL, but I think we'll come back to that later on. Let's just get some PDFs into here, and then we'll talk about how we can have a Power App that allows field workers or mobile workers to be able to access those PDFs really quickly and easily. So I will grab some PDFs that I just have sitting on my other desktop, and we'll drop it in here. And I have a fourth one. Where's my other one? Oh, there it is. Okay. I do like this new modern kind of interface. It sort of works well for me. So we have some PDFs. Now, the typical thing you do in Power Apps is, and let's actually go and build a Power App right now, create an app. Should we do it as a phone app? Phone size or tablet size?
Yes. Okay. Phone app.
Okay. That's kind of cute. Okay, here we go. Create an app. Let's go phone layout. So we're doing a blank app. We're not connecting to any existing data source at this point. Okay, here we go. So let's do this. So we don't need to see our interactive tour. So presumably we'll do something like this. We'll go and insert a PDF. It's under the controls, isn't it? The PDF viewer control. There it is. And I'll pick that one up and I'll move it kind of, oh, that's a little bit small for a PDF viewer. We'll move it to take up most of the screen, but we'll put a menu over the top where you can choose which PDF you want to view. Right, so I guess the basic gist of what we're doing is maybe PDF viewer here and then a gallery across here where we can choose which PDF from the document library. So we're going to need two things. We're obviously going to have to connect to that document library to pull the data in, and then we're going to have to wire up the PDF viewer. So let's do the document library thing first. Now, at the time that we're recording this, you still can't like natively connect to a document library. So if I go View and go Data Sources, and we come in and go Add a Data Source, and we're going to use SharePoint instead of OneDrive, as Daniela was saying. And I have lots of connections, but down here we should see one called SharePoint. And we got 3, that's not good. And the site that we're going to connect to is called PDF Demo. And at the moment, you notice that it isn't giving us any list to choose from, and that's because the PDFs, of course, live in a document library. So that's our first challenge. In fact, it lives in the standard shared documents library, and you can see there's the URL there, shared space documents. So what we're going to have to do is manually connect to this library. And if my memory serves me correctly, that should be as easy as coming in and putting in a custom list name. And I wonder if I call it shared documents or documents. I can't remember. Let's find out, shall we? So if I go shared documents and connect, it is actually possible to connect Power Apps to a document library, except I didn't put the right name in. So let's try that again. So first we'll connect to SharePoint. Our site is PDF Demo, and let's put the library name as Documents, because I think that's what we're going to call it. Connect. And look at that. So even though it is a document library, even though it's a document library and not a list, it is still possible to connect to the document library. So that's handy hint number 1, I guess. Next thing we have to do is insert a gallery, and I know that from the app that Daniela did that looks terrific actually, you would have gone a horizontal gallery, right, Daniela? So that
yes,
it's kind of like a menu up the top here. And then it was something like this. If I recall, for now I'm just going to use a label, but we'll make it fancy later. So if you imagine, each PDF is going to be represented by a square, and we'll make enough room for maybe 4 of them. But for now, if I just inserted a label just so we can look at something about the PDF, that'll do. Now at the moment, this gallery we just made isn't connected yet to the document library. So if we come across to the data panel, we can now connect it to the documents library. And at this point, information about that particular PDF is available to be shown. And if I went name, I assume I'll get the file name. And there you go, there's the name of our PDFs. Now you might think that, oh, well, this is pretty easy. If we set it up that as soon as you click on this one, we just basically put that into here, that'd be nice, but unfortunately it doesn't work in all circumstances. So the idea is this: if we come into this, this PDF viewer has a property called document. There it is, and right now it's sample PDF. But if I did something like this and went, okay, instead of being the sample PDF, there's our gallery, it's called gallery 1, gallery 1 dot, and there's a property called selected. So whichever the selected one is, and because it is already linked to that document library, there is, for example, a property called link. So you think, oh cool, gallery1.selected.link, and that would be a way to get to the PDF. Now unfortunately, let's just test this. If I click it, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. No, see how it's basically complaining? Now there's a couple of, the one main reason for that, and particularly on a phone, is that SharePoint URLs are authenticated. You can't just randomly go to a SharePoint URL. And so when Power Apps tries to access that URL, a lot of the time it's doing it anonymously, particularly when you're on your phone and you're out in the field because you haven't authenticated to SharePoint. So and that's why the PDF browser can't render this. So the next challenge was, okay, so how can we make this work? And fortunately, we can actually make it work using Flow. Now, what is important, I guess, is if we go and have a look in this gallery and have a look at our data source again, bring up that data panel. One of the built-in properties, I'll show it over here, is one called identifier. That's like the unique identifier to this particular PDF, and each one will be unique. Now, that's not the full link to it, but it does uniquely identify it. And just keep that in mind because we're going to make use of that and we're going to use Flow to go and get the PDF on our behalf. So what I'm going to do now, if I covered everything, Daniela, I think I have. I think we'll go and do the Flow, get it wired up, cool, and then we'll improve the overall look and feel. So I'm going to come into Flow. Here is a whole bunch of flows I've done. I'm going to make a blank flow. Now, this is going to be a very powerful flow action that I don't know if a lot of people use, but it's one that I find really useful. We're going to use an action called a request response action. So if I go to request, type in request, you'll see there it is right there. There's a request connector, I should say. So we do our connector when a HTTP request is received, and that's going to be our trigger, which basically means every time Power Apps tries to load a PDF, it's actually going to send a request to a URL that is this flow. This flow will be listening on a URL. And so we have to do a couple of things. So firstly, what we're going to have to do is we're going to basically pass in, go back to Power Apps, we're going to pass in the identifier of the currently selected PDF. So if I click this one over here called workbook, I'll send the identifier of the workbook to Flow. So it will come through into here. And so we're going to need to grab that identifier and then we're going to use a SharePoint action to go and get the file based on that identifier. So let's, probably easier to do than explain. We'll add a step.
So you need to add the get to advanced options.
Thank you. One of the things we need to do about this HTTP request is we have to actually tell it the type of HTTP request we're doing. Now, without getting into ugly detail, there are different types of HTTP requests, and usually when you update something or send something like upload a file, that's a post, you're posting data. But when you're getting something like doing a Google search, more often than not that's a get, and in this case we're going to use a get method for our PDF. So that's that bit. Thanks for that. Next step, we need to grab that item identifier. So remember, we're going to pass in the identifier of the file in this request. Now to do that, there's a whole bunch of actions related to variables. We're going to use a variable. Nice thing about Flow, this is something that came out maybe, I don't know, 4 months ago, 5 months ago. But we're going to initialize a variable, this one here. And what should we call this variable? Something like identifier or a PDF ID. PDF ID. We'll make it a string. And this is where things get interesting. So what we're going to have to do is we have to tell, or this variable has to say which part of the request, right? Which part of this HTTP request are we getting this from? Now, I don't always remember this off the top of my head, so this will be an interesting challenge. So we'll see how we go. But basically, we're going to use expressions. So we're going to use this advanced aspect of Flow where you can do your own sort of custom expressions. Because if I just put something in here, at the moment, the only thing that can be passed to this is the body of this request, and we're not using the body of the request at all. If I go to expression, there is a built-in function called trigger. And what trigger does, in fact, there's a whole bunch of trigger things, but if I go trigger, trigger says grab whatever information triggered this thing, and now we can start refining things. And so again, you'd have to have a look at the full output of what gets sent in a HTTP request, but what I can tell you is there's a section or a little bit of configuration called, I think it's outputs. I think it's where we start. Outputs, and then it would be queries, I think. And then it's whatever we pass to the URL. And I think, what do we call ours, Danielle? A PDF ID? Something like that?
Item ID.
Item ID. Okay. So that might seem a little bit weird and cryptic, and I won't know if it's worked until we test it, but basically here's kind of what happens. That we're going to pass in the body of the URL an item ID. This extracts it from all of the material that came in with the request. So if I click OK, and we've locked that in, and I'll call this extract PDF ID from trigger data. So our next step is, once we've got that ID, now we've got what we need to do a SharePoint action. So if I go add an action, this time we're going to use SharePoint, and that's one of the common ones. So you'll see in a second that it appears in this list here. So there you go, it's the fourth one. So I go SharePoint, and SharePoint has an action called get file content. This one here, we want to go and get some file content. And the nice thing about the get file content action, once you've specified which site collection you want to use, so let me do that. It's going to be the site collection called PDF demo, which is where that document library lives. PDF demo, there it is. And look at this, it then says, so what file from this site collection do you want to get? Well, we're going to get the one from the ID that we just specified. So if I click here, go to dynamic content, there is our variable PDF ID. So if that's all correct, we're going to end up with the PDF from this get file content. And the final step is we then need to send it back to Power Apps, basically. So Power Apps is going to request it, and this is going to give it back. So if I add another step, and this is the response step, I think I have to still search for the word request if I can type properly, request. And you'll see under here, under request, oh, there's lots called request, but I'm sure it'll be here somewhere. There it is there, request response. That's the one that says, hey, send something back to the caller. And so if we come up to this response content, and interestingly, I get this from time to time. I don't know if you see this down in yellow, but basically what I need is I want the output of get file content, and it's actually saying we don't see any output that match this format, but if I click see more, so I can see all output, there it is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually, in the body of this response, I'm going to basically send that content. So I've sent a 200 saying, hey, everything's great, here's your file content. There's one little thing I'll do that just helps this. This is everything you need for Power Apps, but if you actually want to use this in a browser, which I'll demonstrate, you have to tell browsers that it's a PDF coming back. Otherwise, the browser doesn't know how to handle it. So there is also a header where you go content type, and this is called MIME types for the geeks, but if I go application/PDF, I think that's right. That basically says in this response, it's like a little hint to the browser, hey, a PDF is coming, and then the browser goes, oh yep, I can handle that inline. So let's call this PDF demo, PDF retrieve demo. How's that? Retrieve demo. Okay. Now, 4-step flow. Hopefully I've got that right. Now that I've actually saved that flow, check this out. When you come back in, it's generated the URL for you. So we need that URL because Power Apps is going to use that. So if I go copy URL, copy to the clipboard, and now let's come back to our Power App, which is here. And here's what we're going to do. Basically, this PDF browser, or this PDF control, remember it's got a property called document, and that's where you put the URL to where your PDF lives. And if we wipe that out and actually put our flow URL, so let's just extend this. Now it's a little bit of an ugly URL, but that's okay. So there's our URL to flow, and flow's going to give us stuff back. But at the moment we haven't told it which PDF that we want to grab. And so that's where we're going to do this. We're going to go and what was the name of that parameter? We called it item ID, I think, didn't we? Item ID. So we go item ID equals, and then we're going to have to do this and to separate it. And now we're going to go gallery 1 dot selected dot identifier. And if we've got that all right, allegedly we'll see some PDFs and we can check all this. Oh, and look, oh my goodness, it worked first go. Can you believe that?
Nice.
That's terrific. So there you go. Now, if I go and click this one, do an on select, it should basically pull up a completely different PDF. Of course, if the PDF is like really huge, it's obviously going to take a while. And also the format of the PDF helps a lot as well, right? These are like A4 documents. This is my son's barista, his barista certificate. But I know that you've done stuff with the formatting of PDFs for like small form factor devices to make it look like really, really good. And I think this one's an example of a large one. I think I threw in there you go, a picture of a teddy bear with a Jedi outfit and a lightsaber. If you're wondering what that is, I have a book on the topic, so that's perfectly normal. It's not weird. All right, so that's the basic gist on how we can actually pull in data from SharePoint. But we took it a little bit further than that, right? Like, what was the use case, or what did you end up doing, Daniela, to make this like have a really good kind of user experience?
So one thing we did was, because this was essentially an initiative driven by the company more broadly, we actually got our graphic designer to, for example, redesign the PDFs that we're using to make the font large, and so the PDFs are made for a use case as that, where you may be looking at the PDFs on your phone. So everything is much larger, and it's quite a good feel. And then the other thing we did was we worked on the gallery at the top. So we added icons, for example, because internally we use certain icons that employees would recognize to mean a certain thing. So in addition to using the PDF names, we actually included icons in the gallery at the top, which makes it a little bit more interactive and user-friendly as well.
Yeah. Well, we can demonstrate that in a second, but keep going.
Yeah. The other thing is I then played around with the colors, of course. So if depending on what you're selecting, the tile or your selection, it tells you which PDF you're reading. And then I guess the other use case that we haven't done yet, but I can see as an extension to the solution you found, is that because essentially this solution can connect to all sorts of document libraries you may have in your SharePoint, you could even include a drop-down that makes you or allows you to select which document library you want to select, and then to filter those PDFs. So you can literally connect to a document library or a SharePoint site that is huge, and essentially give the person access to all those documents, and they can browse it. And what I really like about this solution also is that the app doesn't try to load the whole full suite of PDFs that are available, but it only triggers the flow to load that one PDF that you're selecting. So I think that's quite nice.
I've done some, so based on this idea that we sort of hit upon, I've done some things where I've added filters underneath. So you might have your 4 selectors, and then you've got some filters exactly as you're talking about, so that you can browse other PDFs. And it also works for images as well. So I can confirm that. But let's actually do what you suggested, because there's another neat trick with Power Apps that we can do that's a kind of a non-obvious trick. But I'll show you how we can do the icons exactly as Daniela described. So we're going to replace this. What we might, in fact, we'll talk as we do it. First up, let's grab this label. We'll keep the label maybe, and we'll put it down underneath. So we've sort of got at least something. And I'll drop the font to make it a bit more reasonable. Maybe I'll just go say 14 for now. So there's our label. But now in here, let's drop I guess we're going to need a rectangle and a picture icon. Yeah, all right. So let's go insert icon, and let's go grab a rectangle. Rectangle, cool. You can always tell if you've got it right because you see lots of them. And that's going to have to go to the bottom, or are we going to put that on top so it's a see-through click? Is that sort of...
No, it goes to the back. It's just, That's the one I use just to essentially then alter the colors depending on your selection. So it's really just a background.
Gotcha. All right, let's just center that file name too. And we're not going to keep it that background. That's kind of horrible. So let me, for now, just give it the white fill, and we'll deal with that later. And then finally, let's insert an image control. And, did I put the image control in the right place? Yeah, I did. I can see it there. Okay, and another good habit is to rename these controls as your apps get more complex. You don't want to start to, image 1, image 1.1, image 1.1.1, and all of that kind of thing. So we've got this image control. Now the thing about an image control, it has a property called image, okay? And so what we're going to do is now, if we go back to our original document library. Now let's have a look at these 2 extra columns that I added. So I'll go into library settings so you can have a look at them, because the way we've done them, they're actually formatted as hyperlink columns. So you can see there, icon URL, hyperlink or picture. So that's important. It has to be a hyperlink or picture. The other thing that's important is when you actually go into that link, it must be formatted as a picture. So this is the one requirement for what we're going to show you. So with that prerequisite in mind, and both of them need to be formatted as a picture, by the way, okay, here's what we're going to do. For each one of these PDFs in the library that you were just looking at, and come on. Oh, I thought I put stuff in. Did I? Oh, there they are. There was a slight delay. That was weird. That made me second guess myself. So what we'll do is, I actually have another document library that Daniela was kind enough to set up. And if we just quickly go and have a look at this document library is called Icons. And in this document library, we've got a whole bunch of icons that you did using PowerPoint, right? So I'm in awe of Daniela's ability to produce really nice apps. And she seems to have all these tricks related to user experience. But all of these ones that you'll see come up in a second, they all came out of PowerPoint, right? They're all built in.
Yes.
Okay. So you notice that we've got, and they're named like Icon 1 and then Icon 1 Grey. So we have the grey version. And so the idea is, what we're going to do is, by default, it'll be the grey version of the icons, except when it's selected. If that one happens to be selected, it then goes blue. And that way you can sort of toggle between the various icons and see what's going on. So that's the plan. Now, so what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to go back to my document library with those PDFs. And let's cheat a little bit and use a cut and paste from something I prepared earlier. So let's do quick edit. I really like quick edit. Quick edit saves heaps of time. So gone into quick edit on this library. And for icon URL, for this first one, I've just pasted in icon1.jpg, and look at that, it's come up fine. And then if I grab for the selected URL, oh, I got it around the wrong way. Let me fix that. That should have been icongrey.jpg. So if I go, oh, I still didn't get it right. Use the clipboard properly, Paul. Okay, there we go. Icongrey.jpg. All right, very good. And I'm wondering if I can cut and paste this quickly. In fact, what we'll do, this will be one of those moments in the video where it magically skips so that the audience doesn't have to sit through me cutting and pasting with my slow, inefficient typing. All right, so we've just updated the URL of the icon. So you can see now that each of these PDFs has got an icon URL that's grey and a selected icon URL that's blue. So if we come back to Power Apps, this is what should be doable. So we come back to this image property, and in fact you can see here where it's already, it goes and looks for hyperlink fields presumably. There is the icon URL. Right, and so if we refresh this data connection, I might add a little refresh icon into the top right. So let's just do that. Let's insert Mr. Refresh or reload. And I'll just for now put it up here, not particularly the right spot, but I'm going to refresh the data source. So we're just going to go refresh, and the name of our data source is documents. And let's see if we've actually done enough, because I suspect that should be actually kind of enough. So, booyah, look at that. We have some icons. The sizes are all off, so let's quickly see if we can do a little bit of improvement here. Biggest thing is the label, I suppose. We're just going to have to let it go like that. Tall and skinny. And then if I go like this, how's that? Not bad. I mean, okay for demo, I suppose. Not perfect, but that at least shows you that you can. I mean, it's a neat trick, right? If you basically have a document library and you want to have icons for documents, so long as you put in the URL formatted as a picture, Power Apps will pick it up and basically include it. And so, of course, we now have we have 2 icons. We want this to be smart enough that when you click one, we want it to change, right? And so the way we're going to use that is we're going to have to make a little variable in Power Apps. So this is how I would make this icon URL. We have to make this icon URL here conditional. It'll be either icon URL or it'll be the selected icon URL, depending on certain conditions. The condition is if it's the selected one. So how are we going to do that? Well, we'll do it like this. If I click on this icon here, this image, and we go down to the onSelect property, this is the I've clicked you property. We're going to set a variable. So I'm going to use command set, and we'll call the variable selected PDF. So selected PDF is going to be equal to this item, and I'll explain this item in a second. This item, in fact, this item probably will do just as is. Let's give it a go. Now, this item is a property of a gallery. In a gallery, when you're working with a gallery, this item refers to whichever row in a gallery you happen to have chosen. Now, this is a horizontal gallery, so they come out as columns, but for all intents and purposes, it's like rows in a table. And so now, every time you click the image, the selected PDF is going to equal this item. And so why is that important? Well, if we come back to the image property now, okay, is we can do this. For the image property, we can actually take this out for a second. And hopefully I've got this right, again, top of my head and all of that sort of thing. So we go if selected PDF, that was that variable we did. If the selected PDF is equal to this item, let's see if that works. It may not. Yeah, I didn't think so. Because I chose, now this item refers to the whole gallery. So if I go if selected PDF dot, let's use identifier actually, dot identifier is equal to this item dot identifier, this item dot identifier, oops, identifier. Okay, so if it's the currently selected one, then we're going to actually use the selected icon PDF column. We're going to use, go back to the library, we're going to use this column, selected icon URL, instead of icon URL. So if we come back to Power Apps, we would choose selected icon URL. But if it's not equal, if it's not the currently selected one, we'll go icon URL. Okay, and if we play that, and if we refresh maybe, or let's just click one, look at that. Yay, getting there.
Nice.
Awesome. So that shows you how you can sort of put a bit of a nice UI around this stuff. And of course you could, we've put a rectangle behind there, so we can change the color of that as well. And of course we've got some work to do with the text. But that again just shows you how you can change icons on the fly. So that's pretty cool. Next, and there's the PDF. And that actually brings us to our next issue, I suppose, is the fact that it can take a while for the PDF to load, and we're not really giving the user any kind of indication that the PDF's loading. So they might click an icon and go, wait, what's happening? And they might click it again, but meanwhile the PDF is still loading. So should we fix up that one while we're here?
Yeah, so one thing, I just noticed that you're missing that top bar that usually appears in the PDF reader, that black bar, that
yes.
by default has the...
Yeah, that would be the show controls property. And yes,
I see.
Exactly right. So you can see here, now you can see why the delay on some of these, because PDFs are not small documents, right? So you have this thing where this one here, I've just clicked that, and there was a lag of about maybe 5 seconds before we've seen it. So we sort of got to give the user some indication, maybe like a loader or something that enables them to know that something's actually happening. Like particularly this one here is the one with the image, and they'll always take longer than the others because they're typically a bigger PDF. So we're looking, that was probably maybe 10 seconds for that one to come up. So yeah. I guess, what do you think, what have you done in terms of improving the user experience for this?
Yeah, so I added a loader type, I don't know, how do you say that? A GIF?
I call it GIF, but animated GIF.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I added it's called a snake GIF. So it's essentially just those dots that show the user that it's loading.
Yep. And
just so that, gives you an idea that something is happening as a result of you clicking it. So. All
right. Well, let's give that a go, because I actually happen to have one that you sent to me. So if we so what we're going to do is actually load this one in to the media of this Power App, right? We're going to need it locally. So I'm going to go to File, Media, and this is where you can do images. And I think I have this on my desktop. So if I go browse, go to my desktop, and you will see one called Loader here somewhere. Loader, Loader, Loader. There it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's a nice little sort of snake loader GIF, and I called it Loader because I'm not very imaginative with my file names. Now I'm assuming then that you'd put it in the black bar or something like that, because all right. So if I insert an image control, insert image, cool, and now we change the image to Loader. Awesome. Oh, and it sizes. Oh, of course, the image control has different properties for sizing. That's the one nice thing about that control. By the way, if people are wondering, there is something called image position, and that's where you can set it to fit or center or whatever, just like desktop backgrounds. But I guess is it actually something where you'd put it over the whole thing like this, or in the middle?
I made it quite small. I just put it in the middle there. Yeah, I made it much smaller than that, just for users to see that something's happening.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing is that by default it would be running constantly because it's an image. So it's actually that that function that you found that is called PDF state change or something that we can use to determine when it shows and when it doesn't.
That's it. So this is actually one that my daughter and I figured out, where what we wanted to do is, obviously we only want to show this while the PDF is loading. We don't want to show it while the PDF is loaded. And in looking at the PDF control, we came across a property called onStateChange. So onStateChange is kind of like basically saying when something happens. And I noticed we did some testing, and pretty much when the PDF renders, when it loads, when you change page, like everything can create a state change. So we thought, okay, how about this? If I go back to this image here, and if we go to the onSelect for the image, onSelect, right? And so right now, remember how we were selecting the selected PDF, for the icons here? We'll add another command, and we'll go set, say PDF event count, probably a horrible variable name. We'll set it to 0. So basically it's kind of like, all right, there's 0. Then every time something happens in this PDF, so now we go to that state on state change, and now we go set PDF count, right, to PDF event count plus 1. So what's happening now is, in theory, every time you go load a PDF, that event count gets set to 0, and then every time the PDF loads, that's incrementing. Every time an event happens, 1, 2, yeah, it's that value is incrementing. And so what we figured out, or actually I made my daughter do it and she figured it out, that basically once you it takes 2 events before the PDF loads. So what we did was this: on this little image that we did, we go to the visible property. And instead of always being visible, we're going to make it conditionally visible. And we're going to do this. If the first condition is if PDF event count is greater than 2. So if 2 events have happened, we're going to hide it because we know that's pretty much the PDF is loaded. So we've said basically that PDF count variable, as soon as it's greater than 2, we're going to hide things. So visible is now going to be false. Otherwise, visible is true. Okay, that's the basic gist. So let's do that. Now let's test it. We'll probably have to sort of do a refresh and click something. So I've clicked something. Hopefully the PDF starts loading. Oh, there was that little flicker there. What did I do wrong?
I actually seem to recall that we only, the condition was make it visible if it's below 1. Is it because when we click something, we set it to 0. Yeah. When it refreshes, it becomes 1, so we only want to see it.
I realized I did greater than 2 when it should be greater than and equal to 2. I think that's what it is. Let me just test. I think if I just do this again. So see, it's gone. So if I say, like, let's do the Jedi t-shirt. See, loading, loading, and then it goes, you can still see it's loading, tick, and up it comes. What we could even do is for that little bar, you could do a black GIF or a slightly bigger one to the exact same dimensions as that bar, and you could sort of you can fake it out that way. But you can see there now that at least users have got a really strong visual that something's happening.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
And yeah, the other thing that I did was also I made one other change, because what I thought was, when you first load this, let's pretend, in fact, in my use case, I had one where this is not the home page. I've got like another app, and where you click on the the safety document portal, and you click it, and it takes you to this screen. So when it comes to the screen, we haven't yet chosen a PDF. And so what I did, I also hid it when you hadn't chosen a PDF. But that, in a nutshell, is basically kind of the, apart from tidying up around the top, that's basically the gist of what we did as far as being able to bring sort of information to the fingertips of field workers. I think we're in a similar industry, or at least I consult to a similar industry, but there's a lot of situations in sort of the construction industry and the engineering industry where, particularly safety, among other things, but the need to pull up relevant content or schematics or diagrams or asset information is just hugely important, and most supervisors on site are really time poor, and they just don't have the time to go back to their desks, and it's basically they're operating virtually off their mobile phone. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, exactly. So the benefit for that, in our example, it's actually linked to training and development, in the sense that we make employee complete certain courses, and we want them to remember it, and they have to redo the course every year or every 2 years. But if you're really in a situation where you want to recall certain key points that you learned from that course, it's quite impractical to log back into the LMS and to go to that course, to flick through the slides to find what you're looking for. So that initiative I was talking about is actually a bunch of PDFs that summarize the key points of certain training courses that we want people to take away and have quick access to, rather than having to go back to the course that they did months ago. So there's certainly a lot of different use cases, and
And like I said before, this doesn't extend just to PDFs. You can also do this with images. So it's possible to modify the flow to actually handle things slightly differently. If it detects that it's dealing with a JPEG, it can bring that back. And then Power Apps, you could set it up so that you could hide the PDF control and then show the image control. And so you could end up doing kind of the combination of the two. So yeah, quite a powerful little use case. And actually, when you look at it, at the end of the day, it was all based on 4 flows, pretty much. Oh, and that's right. There was one last little thing, and you can see it there. When the app first starts and this control first loads, it automatically goes and attempts to actually pull. It calls the flow. Why? Well, if we go and have a look at the app again. And let's get out a preview. It's because the document property here is set to this URL, and so you see where we've got item ID equals and then whatever the gallery is set to. Now, of course, what happens is if the gallery is not set because you've just loaded it and there's no selected PDF, then there is going to be no item ID, which means flow, when you come in here, is going to basically complain at this point because, and in fact it'll tell you, the item ID cannot be evaluated because it doesn't exist, right? So that's sort of one that you also can easily cater for. Probably the best way to cater for that is actually check, and this is conditional. So the document can be set to if is blank, or is not is blank gallery.selected.identifier, then do nothing. Otherwise, then do it. And then that way you won't be sort of doing an unnecessary call to your flow. But otherwise, look, I think it's a simple flow. It's actually a pretty simple app. It doesn't take that long. It takes longer to explain than it does to actually build. And it's a highly effective use case for anyone in the, I think, engineering, resources, construction, asset management sector, anything that involves field workers going out that need access to information really quickly on their mobile device. In a flexible way. One last thing for me, certainly the one thing you've got to be careful about, and you might think about this in your flow, is because that item ID, effectively, if I go back to the flow for a second, and we have a look at this get file content piece, This item identifier pretty much means anything in this particular site collection is available via this method. Now, you've got to think about that, because obviously if you have one document library that's got your secured or open content and one with secured content, then I suggest that either you redesign your site so that only public content is in this particular site collection, or you can add logic to your flow in here that actually that ID has the path. Inside that ID, you actually have the path to the library. So we could add a step in here that says, hey, if the path does not include this particular library name, do not retrieve the data. So you have plenty of ways that you can deal with the security implications of this. And of course, the nice thing about Flow is you have the full transaction history of every time it's run as well. So that PDF retrieve demo, if we look down here, you'll be able to see our run history, and there's a whole bunch of successful calls. So good from an audit point of view, easy to deal with the, I guess, information assurance point of view, but it's definitely one worth bearing in mind.
I think the only thing though is just because it works with a URL, if you go into the flow to find out who triggered it, you can't actually tell because it's essentially an anonymous call.
Well, actually, that's then how that's a really good one, and this is, I'm just thinking on the fly here, but here's how I would deal with that one. So you notice in the URL we got item ID equals like gallery.selected, so there's our ID. How about we then go right, and then we also send something like user ID, right, equals and then go user dot email. And so basically what we've done there is we've now constructed a version of that URL, right? And that would enable us to, and I haven't got that, I've got to put an ampersand on because this is a URL. That ought to do it. But basically, I could now in Flow, right? If we go back into the Flow, I could very easily add another variable, just like we did here, whereas I was, you know how I was using trigger output queries item ID, I could have another variable trigger output queries user ID, and I could save that to anywhere, you know, to some log or whatever. So you have the ability, and of course, you know, it can't be really circumvented as such, because if you don't specify that, right, it won't work. And if you really want to go crazy, look, you could do things like, it is actually possible to tell the difference between a user hitting this in a browser versus it coming from Power Apps. So you could also do additional checks to go, wait, this is a browser, I'm not going to do this, and that sort of thing. So yeah, there's our use case. Thanks very much, Daniela, for taking the time to go through this with me. I really appreciate that. Hopefully people will get some benefit from it, and let us know if you use it and how you use it in your circumstances and the use case that that drives it for you. But otherwise, yeah, thank you very much.
You too.